Hi everyone and welcome to Deep Geek Live. Today we're going to talk about Elrond, everyone's favourite half-elf and a central part of Tolkien's legendarium. So central in fact that he's one of only a handful of characters who appear in all of The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings and The Silmarillion. It's a little pop trivia thing for you. Have a guess if you can figure out who the other one. Gandalf I'll give you for free, but not many characters we actually meet in all three of those. But what I try to do with all of these live streams is to frame them around questions that I get from my patrons, as well as pick up as many questions as I can from the chat. I'm afraid it's just me today. I normally try my Lord of the Rings live streams to have a guest on. Didn't quite manage to organise that this week, but I'll try and get a surprise guest on in a couple of weeks' time just to make up for it. But before we get into Elrond, just a few things that have been going on in the slightly wider world of fantasy and TV, fantasy sci-fi TV shows and books. There have been a lot of new things happening this week. New TV shows. We've had Obi-Wan Kenobi, which we've got 3 episodes of out now. I've been watching that. I am a Star Wars fan. I don't cover it on the channel, but I do really enjoy Star Wars. I've quite enjoyed it. I don't think it's the best thing that they've done, but it's fun. Something that has had some very good reviews, though, is Stranger Things Season 4. The first half of that has come out already. I think in a week or two's time, we're going to get the second half of Season 4 coming out. Everyone I know who's watched that has said good things about it. Finally, coming out tomorrow is The Boys Season 3. If you've not got into The Boys, I actually really like it. It is a superhero TV show, but with a bit of a twist. It is violent, but it is very well written, and one of the few shows that, because I've not read any of the graphic novels or any of the background stuff, it still takes me by surprise sometimes with plot twists, which is a good thing. So do check out The Boys. Seasons 1 and 2 are available before you get on to Season 3. But I think one of the main things I wanted to talk about, if you're not into A Song of Ice and Fire, you just want The Lord of the Rings, feel free to skip forward 5 minutes, because George R. R. Martin has done, I think, a very interesting update on his Not a blog, which I will see whether I can get the technology to work on. Let's do this. Here we go. Look at that. So we've got... he's doing quite a few of these at the moment, actually. Every few weeks, month or so, he's been giving an update on where he's at on a lot of different things. He does seem to still be doing a lot of different things, but this time I think we can pick out a few really fascinating updates. The first one we've got here, which is his regular update on the Winds of Winter. He knows he can't give a big update without saying what's going on with the Winds of Winter, and he rounds it off saying, "Winds, you say? Yes, still working. Finally finished a clutch of Cersei chapters that were giving me fits. Now I am wrestling with Jaime and Brienne. The work proceeds, though not as fast as many of you would like." Now, this is fascinating because, yes, he's still making progress. It is slow progress. He is making progress. I think that's the general mood that we've had for quite a while now. The fact that he has finished a clutch of chapters about Cersei, I mean, your guess is as good as mine how many is in a clutch of chapters, but a few chapters. I'm intrigued by the fact that he's now moving on. He seems to be doing these in groups. So he follows a storyline through, and then he seems to be going through to do another storyline. And Jaime and Brienne is next, which is intriguing because I think this confirms for us what we thought made sense given the direction of travel for those characters, that they are in the Winds of Winter. They will be spending a lot of time with each other. Obviously, they start together. This is the last we saw of them. It was Brienne coming to Jaime and saying, "Hey, I found the Hound. Come with me. We'll find Sansa." and she kind of tempts him away. That's the last we see of him. So we were expecting there to be chapters for the two of them together, and this, I think, is confirmation that we are definitely going to be getting that. The second thing is also to do with the Winds of Winter, but a little bit more of a tangent. He talks a bit. Try and scroll up to this. He's lost a lot of friends recently, George R.R. Martin, which is very sad. He talks here. One of his friends, John Miller, he talks about a little bit, but with reference to the Winds of Winter, he has an interesting little sentence here. He talks about John Miller. He says, he had been working on a novel called Black Train Coming even longer than I have been working on the Winds of Winter. It would be great if one of his writer friends finishes it for him. Now, this is intriguing because I think this is the closest I've seen him accept the principle of if a writer dies, wouldn't it be really nice if another writer steps in and finishes off their work? Which, given the fact that he's specifically linking this across to the Winds of Winter, is very interesting, obviously. Now, I hope this never has to happen, but obviously, as he admits, even in this blog, he is now getting old. The possibility is obviously there that he may not be able to finish them. Previously, he has gone, when he was put on the spot about Robert Jordan, who, as I'm sure most of you know, he was the writer of the Wheel of Time series. He got most of the way through it, but with 3 books to finish, he got cancer, tragically, and he knew he had a few months left, and instead of trying to finish it himself because he knew he wouldn't be able to, he dedicated some time to pulling all his notes together, making sure that there was some clear bullet points about what was going to happen so that someone else could take over. And George R.R. Martin in the past has said, yeah, in that circumstance, he probably would do the same. But this, I think, is the first time that he's just sort of said, if I get, or closest he's come to, if I get knocked over by a bus tomorrow, I'd be okay with it. I think it would be a good thing if someone else took over. That's probably reading too much into it, but there you go. That's my random thought on Not a Blog. The other thing that he was talking about a lot is House of the Dragon. Now, there's a couple of interesting things here. He says, I've now watched rough cuts of 9 of the 10 episodes. I continue to be impressed. I cannot speak to the SFX, many of which are not in yet, but the look of it is great. The acting, directing, and writing are all first rate. Now, he's always been very big on this. He's always talked it up. He's always sounded genuine. So this isn't new news, but I think this is, again, confirmation that he does seem to like what's there. The bits that I find interesting are, firstly, when he says, for all you book fans, it is my story. Sure, there are some changes from Fire and Blood. We could not present 3 alternative versions of every major event, and keep our sanity, but I think Ryan Condal and his writers have made good choices, even some improvements. So that, I think, is the first thing, because we've covered this topic a few times on this channel. I've had a lot of questions on it. How are they going to do this? Fire and Blood is written as a history book, and as a history book there are a number of different sources, and so when we get to some crucial moments, we get different versions of the truth, different versions of what happened. This source says such and such a thing, this source says such and such a thing. The writer of Fire and Blood says, well, we'll perhaps never know. And the question is, how do you adapt that to a screen? Clear, I think here, they have, maybe not every case, but in quite a few of them, they have made a decision. They have made good choices, even some improvements. So they are not going to take the step back all the time and say, well, there are many different possibilities here. They are going to tell us what, in their world, in their version, in their interpretation, happened. So that, I think, answers that question. The other thing I think is quite interesting when he goes on to say, for years, I have been saying that the TV version of Shay, as portrayed by Sibel Kekilli, was a deeper, richer, and more nuanced character than the Shay in my novels. He has been saying that for like 10 years. In a similar vein, I am vastly impressed by the show's version of King Viserys, played by Paddy Considine, who gives the character a tragic majesty that my book Viserys never quite achieved. So this, I think, I'm personally pleased. This was... People who regularly watch these live streams probably recall a year or so ago when the first bits of casting came out. The name that I was most excited about in terms of match up to the character was Paddy Considine being Viserys, because I thought at the time, still think, that he brings a certain intense vulnerability to characters that I thought would work incredibly well with Viserys, and I'm delighted that George R. R. Martin sees something of what I thought conceptually would probably happen. He says that's there on the screen. So I'm very excited about this. I think Viserys, as a character, he's very open and honest about this, George R. R. Martin. He does get kind of pushed to the background in this build-up to the war with these two factions, with these amazing charismatic figures like Daemon, Alicent, Corlys Velaryon, these huge figures. Viserys can come across as just a little bit weak. So I'm delighted that in this, he's not just going to be a weak character. He's going to have, and what's the phrase he came here, a tragic majesty. That works perfectly for me. So those are the updates that we have from George R. R. Martin. I'd be fascinated what you make of them, whether there's anything that you think that I've missed in that. There's a lot. He's doing a lot of different blog posts now. Kat Kent saying, thank you for your work. Thank you very much. Have a quick flick through. Andrew Kay saying, I always felt Considine was a curious choice given he plays brooding, intense characters. Really looking forward to how he approaches Viserys. Greet Weirwood saying, a lot of people mentioning he's not getting any younger. We may never get an ending. They can shut up now. Well, yeah, I mean, he, even in this blog post, he describes himself as very old. So he is becoming increasingly aware, I think, particularly with lots of his friends dying as well, of his own mortality. So that does start to get you thinking about these things. Just have a quick flick through. If there's any other comments in the chat, I think I will just pick up on the main topic of conversation today, which will be Elrond. Okay, so let's move on to talk about Elrond for a while. Elrond as a character, I've already mentioned how central he is. He's also, and we'll come on to his family tree in a moment because it's absolutely fascinating. Tolkien deliberately creates him as a character that brings everything together as a sort of a hub, and that is what we find in Rivendell as well. So keep this in mind as the sort of what Tolkien is doing with this character. Is he's wanting Rivendell and he's wanting Elrond to be the center point, the meeting place for different cultures, different ideas, and the heart of the good side and their decision on where to go. It's to Rivendell that people decide they have to go, seeking wisdom, seeking refuge. There are plenty of other places they could go to. They could go to Galadriel. They could try and seek out the dwarves. They don't. They go to Rivendell. They go to Elrond, and this is what Tolkien is trying to do. Elrond is the hub. But what I will do is set out an overarching history of Elrond, who he is, what he was doing through this period of time, and then I will start working through my questions from my patrons. Elrond was born towards the end of the first age of Middle-earth. Now, I've got questions about sort of his parentage and heritage in a moment, so I won't go into too much detail there. Suffice to say that his parents were Eärendil and Elwing. Now, you will probably know these names if you've been starting to get into the sort of the Tolkien legendarium. Eärendil is an absolutely pivotal character in Tolkien's history and the history of Middle-earth. The First Age is a story of how Morgoth slowly took over. There was a long build up to it, but he took over Middle-earth until just these few enclaves remained of free elves and free humans. And the person who managed to escape, get all the way over to Valinor to plead with the Valar to come and rescue them, to come and help, to intervene. That was Eärendil. And Eärendil is the character you will remember from the Lord of the Rings. He gets a mention there, but also the Silmaril that he had that lit the way for him. He then, after all of this, he ascends to the heavens, and he is there, the star, that bright star with the beautiful burning light, the guiding light. That is Eärendil and his Silmaril. That is the light that gets captured by Galadriel in the Phial of Galadriel that Sam and Frodo have, that defeats Shelob. That is the same light from the Silmaril that Eärendil has. This is he is a mythical character. He's a legendary character. And Elrond is his son. And Elrond, importantly, was a twin. Elrond and Elros. They were brought up as young elves, on the run, basically. On the run, first of all, from Morgoth, who is sort of pushing to the edges of Middle-earth, defeating any elven enclaves that he can find, but also the Silmaril that Elwing has. That is being hunted down by the sons of Feanor. The elves turn upon themselves, and when Eärendil and Elwing head off west, they leave their two sons behind. After this huge, it's one of the kinslayings, the sons of Feanor come in, try to grab this Silmaril, kill loads of elves. These two young children are left, Elrond and Elros are left. What's going to happen to them? Well, the two surviving sons of Feanor, Maedhros and Maglor, they take pity on them. It's a fascinating twist, because these characters could be pure evil. They're killing their brother elves, they're killing their sister elves, they're anathema to everything that the elves should be standing for. They get hold of these two children whose parents have escaped with the thing that they are desperately hunting for. They could do huge damage to them, but actually they take pity on them, particularly Maglor, we're told, and they hide them, but in a cave behind a waterfall. And this is where Elrond gets his name. It's domed. Tolkien translates it in a few different ways, but the starry dome, as in the dome of the cave roof and the starlight that comes in, that is where his name comes from. Maglor is a hugely tragic character, but there grows between them this bond, this love almost, which is pure but also hugely tragic at the same time. It's a very complicated situation. But Eärendil's mission is a success. The Valar launch this counterattack against Morgoth. Morgoth is destroyed. Middle-earth is saved. Everything is shifted and changed around. Elrond and Elros's parents cannot return, and they grow up, but they're given a choice because they have got a very unique heritage, which means that they are both a bit human and a bit elf, and whether you're human or elf makes a big difference to the Valar. How are they going to be treated? What's going on? And they're told they have to choose. Do you wish to be living a life as an elf or living a life as a human? Elros chooses to live a life as a human. Elrond chooses to live a life as an elf. Elros heads off. He becomes the first king of Numenor, and all of the kings of Numenor descend down from him. He leads a very long life. I think he's about 500 before he dies, but it is a mortal life. Elrond lives all through the second and third ages, 6,500, 7,000 years all told. Once you add in the little bit extra at the beginning from the first age, he lives a very long life and ends it, as we know, much later, getting on the ship heading west, the white ship there with Galadriel and Gandalf and the hobbits. But Elrond in the second age, he's still relatively young in elf terms, but he's got this huge heritage, and he seems to be taken under the wing of Gil-galad, who is the new High King of the elves, and he becomes his second in command, effectively. We don't read huge amounts of details, but we do read that when Anatar, sexy Sauron, in disguise, comes and tries to persuade people, hey, do you want to make some rings of power with me? Elrond was one of the people who was mistrustful. Later on, when Sauron invades across Eriador, across Middle-earth, Elrond is dispatched by Gil-galad to go and help out. He doesn't really succeed in this. He gets to a point where he realizes actually he's completely overwhelmed by Sauron's forces and goes to try and find some defensible position, which he does, and that becomes Imladris Rivendell. This will be his base from now on. So he is there right at the end of the Second Age, the last alliance of elves and men, that bit that we see in the flashback at the very beginning of the Lord of the Rings movies. Elrond is there. He's the herald of Gil-galad. He's his right-hand man. And Gil-galad dies, as we know. Elrond does do this urging of Isildur to destroy the ring, but fails. And then we move on into the Third Age. By this time, Elrond has got the Ring of Power, the one that Gil-galad had. He's passed it on to Elrond. And Elrond sets himself up in Rivendell. That's now going to be his base for the rest of his time on Middle-earth. And he doesn't really move much from there after that point, it has to be said. He marries in early years of year 109, fun fact, of the Third Age. He marries Celebrian, who is the daughter of Galadriel and Celeborn. They have 3 children together, twins, 2 twin boys, and also Arwen. Tragically, his wife, we'll talk about her in just one moment, but she gets injured and heads off to the west. So when we reach the story that we know, it is just Elrond there. All 3 of his children are still around. He is tied by marriage to Galadriel, and also knows very well Círdan, off to the far west. And I don't think I need to recap what he does during the events of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. Suffice to say that this is the last homely house. This is the place that people go to get wisdom, to get healing, and to get rest. So that's the overview of Elrond. The only thing I think I would add into that, probably in the Third Age, is his commitment to support Arnor, the Northern Kingdom, which came under huge amounts of attack from Angmar, from the Witch King, and while it was still there, he was supporting them. After it had gone, he carried on supporting the royal line of Angmar. He took in each generation the heir, the leader, what would then the Dunedain, but the heir of Isildur, and he raised them. He fostered them in Rivendell, and he raised them, and he kept in Rivendell the symbols of kingly power, kingly rule for Arnor. So he has already the shards of the sword Narsil, but also the scepter of Anúminas, the ring of Barahir. He keeps them in Rivendell for the person who will come, who will be able to claim them once more, which, as we know, will be Aragorn. Okay, so that's the sort of the overview of Aragorn. Let's go to a few questions. So Diego Godoy saying, "Hola, Robert. Hola. Could you please provide a bit of context on why Elrond is a half-elf as opposed to a full elf? Can half-elves go to the Undying Lands too?" Well, let me see whether I can do a little bit more tech mage stuff. Not sure if I can. Let's do... Oh yeah, I'm going to do this. This is going to work. I'm very impressed by my new ability to show these things. I hope you can see that. This is Elrond's family tree. So what I don't... If you're not into sort of detailed family tree, then perhaps this next little bit won't be for you. But there are some important overarching points that come from this. Elrond, you will see there, sort of in the middle, in bold, sort of slightly over halfway down. Elrond is there. To his right, you've got Elros, his brother. Now, their parents, as we've seen, are Elwing and Eärendil. Eärendil, the famous, the legendary, he was the son of Tuor and Idril. Why is this important? So this comes from Gondolin. And Tuor was a human and Idril was an elf. So this comes down to Eärendil was a true, what we might call, half-elf. One parent was an elf, one parent was a human. There are three in Tolkien's Legendarium. There are three marriages between humans and elves that significant. This is one of them, Tuor and Idril. Another one, when you go all the way down, you will get to Arwen and Aragorn, of course, being Elrond's daughter. And the other you get by going the other way up Elrond's family tree. So Elwing's parents were Nimloth and Dior. Dior came from Beren and Luthien. Now, Beren and Luthien is a combination of names that I'm sure you know. Beren being the man, Luthien being the woman. So those are the three human elf marriages that we read about in Tolkien's Legendarium. They're all surrounding Elrond and Elros. Now, this means that when we talk about Elrond as being half elven, it's not that one of his parents was an elf and one of his parents was a human. It's slightly more complicated than that, but he has a lot of human ancestry in there. The other thing, if you go one generation back beyond, when we've got Luthien, if you look at Luthien's parents, one of them is Thingol, elf king, and the other one is Melian. Melian is a Maya. So this is the only marriage we get of a Maya, and so we have the bloodline heading down this way is Maya as well as human, as well as elf. So when I was saying a bit earlier that we have Elrond as being this central figure who kind of represents the meeting place of Middle Earth, this is who he is. It's not just he has set up a nice house where people want to gather in. This is who he is. He is not just an elf, half elf. He is a mixture of lots of different races. And if you go one step further, you'll find that not only is he a representative of the elves, he's representative of his ancestry covers all three of the major elf groupings, and the human part of his ancestry covers all three of the major Edain human groupings as well. He is deliberately set there as this focus, as this mix of all of these, I mean, there's no dwarves in there, unfortunately, but a mix of all of these different races. So when we're talking about Elrond, the half-elven, that's what we're talking about. Now, when you say, can half-elves go to the Undying Lands too, they were given a choice. So if someone was half-elven, they were given a choice by the Valar. Do you wish to be considered to be elf or human? And this choice was given to Elrond and Elros, but it was also given across to Elwing as well, Erendil. So do they wish to be human? Do they wish to be elves? They came across to Valinor. They were treated like elves. And it was given to Arwen. Arwen being Elrond's daughter, she got to choose. And so this notion of I choose a mortal life, this is very real for her. She defaults to being elf because her father has claimed his elf heritage. He claims himself as elf, but she has the right to choose. Her two brothers as well, Elrahir and Elladan, also, we're not told about this, but also they will have had that choice. They could have chosen to be human. They decide not to, but they could have chosen to be human. So that is his family tree. Let's have a quick chat. I see whether the chat had caught up with that. Justin Shoemaker saying, currently reading Unfinished Tales, much more accessible than Silmarillion. I would agree with that. If you're interested in getting into the deeper world of Tolkien, a lot of people go straight to the Silmarillion. Unfinished Tales picks up on a few just gives extra detail on a whole load of things that will allow you, when you do come to the Silmarillion, it makes that a whole lot more accessible. Megan Jones saying, whoa, so he's got a Maya as a great grandparent. Yeah, absolutely. So this is pretty unique, this heritage that Elrond has got. He's made him this unique character that everyone can then come to, because he has got a link across. And the link across to humanity, we will come back to this, I'm sure, but the link across to humanity is his brother was the first king of Numenor. So actually, the Numenorians are family. It's not just like, oh, there's some humans over there on that island. Elrond will have been looking at it. This is my brother's descendants and what my brother's descendants are doing. 444 says, per my understanding, Elrond and his brother have a choice to become an elf or a human. Why did Elrond choose to be an elf, and why his brother choose opposite? Now, this is one of those questions Tolkien doesn't give us an exact answer to. I think I can throw a few thoughts out there which may help us understand it, because I think that for us just reading it, you think, well, why wouldn't you choose to be an elf? You get to live forever. That's not Tolkien's worldview. That's not the way that he saw within his universe, he saw humanity as being, oh, bad luck, you don't get to live very long. Because for him, that when humans died, they go off. It's never exactly explained where they go. That's left a mystery. But theirs is to inherit Middle Earth, which is a good thing, and then to be reunited with Eru quicker. Unlike the poor elves who are sort of tied in somehow, they have to sort of hang around there with the Valar of forever, basically. So this isn't seen as a second best choice. This is in many ways the elves are fascinated, enticed by, intrigued by the notion of mortality. It's not something that they look and go, oh, no, don't like that. That's not good. We're much better off. They look at it and they actually, in a way, part of them does yearn for this. Because if you think about the elf experience as Tolkien describes it, in Middle-earth, it's a slow wearying. This is the way that it's generally presented, is that you live your long life, but the longer you're there, the less energy you have for carrying on staying in Middle-earth. Humans, that's not, they burn brightly, that's the way that Tolkien sort of described it. So this isn't set up as a, well, that's better than this. These are two different options, two different ways of being, neither being better than the other. The other, in terms of why one might choose one and one might choose the other, we're not told. But I think there are a few things to bear in mind. One of which is what have they experienced, Elrond and Elros? They have been born into a time of war. They have been born into a time when their parents basically abandoned them for good reasons, but did basically abandon them while they were still children. And they have witnessed firsthand elves killing elves. They have witnessed firsthand horrors. Of course, the temptation might be to turn their back on being an elf. That has to have gone through their thought process. But also, Elrond, we know, became wise, perhaps, and because they have this Maya ancestry as well. I do wonder whether there was an element of not seeing the future, then sort of feeling where the future is leading. And maybe they realized that there was a need for both of them there on Middle-earth. Elrond, he could have accepted the elven life and then gone to Valinor, but he didn't. He stayed in Middle-earth. He must have felt that there was a need for him to stay. Similarly, Elros, he had a role, he had a duty, he had a job to fulfill, which is being the first king of Numenor, and he did set them off on a good path. The kings of Numenor, the first few, were good. After that, not so much, but he set them off on a good path. So don't ever underestimate the feeling of duty that good characters often have within Tolkien's world. This feeling of, this is what I should do, this is what I must do, this is my path in life. That, I think, is there. And as twins, it doesn't mean that they have to decide the same thing. They may decide that their paths are both about caring for Middle-earth, but they have different roles to take. Cloaked One picking up for Callie Summers. Thank you so much. I love it when people do this. How does half-elven choice work? Arwen had it as a child of Elrond, but no sign that Elros's kids had a choice. If mortality is a gift, why can't Aragorn opt out? Well, so why Elros's kids didn't... Tolkien, frankly, doesn't give us a detailed breakdown of this. So when I say that Arwen got the choice. Presumably, we're not told, but presumably her brothers did as well. We are simply not told. She appears to make that choice when she decides to marry Aragorn. That seems to be the decision. I choose a mortal life. It's a decision to marry Aragorn and take on a human existence. Presumably the same went for her two brothers, Elladan and Elahir. If they'd chosen to marry human women, then perhaps they would also, that would be the point at which they had that choice. But the default was that they would be elves, because that was the choice that their father made. So that seems to be one, when you step down one generation from Elrond and Elros, that seems to be the position, is that your default is that you stick with what your father, your parent, did and chose, but you can opt out. That seems to be the situation there. That presumably, we're not told, so the history of Numenor is quite limited from Tolkien. He doesn't give us huge amounts of detail. He doesn't tell us huge amounts about Elros, but I think the principle has to be the same. If you're the child of a half-elven, then your default position is that you are of the same thing that they chose, unless you wish to marry somebody of the other race. Would that carry on down for generations afterwards? I don't know. We're not told. I think the assumption is no. I think the assumption is that once we get to the fourth age, that's when things change and shift, because the third age, elves and humans are both there. Once we get the last ship, once Círdan and Celeborn have headed off on the last ship, the elves have gone. We're just left with humans. That pathway has gone. So I think probably that's it. That's where the line is. But as I say, Tolkien doesn't say specifically, but there are implications that we can draw from this. Mara Lee, hi there, Mara, saying just a show of love and appreciation. You are the best. Thank you. Thank you, Robert, for all the content, merch, and stories on both channels and your merch shop. Thank you. I hugely appreciate you and your support, Mara. Candide saying thank you for all your work. No question, as the community and you already bring up the most interesting stuff as always. Also, a big thanks to the moderators, who are surely the kindest I can imagine. Well, I will thank you very much. And as for the moderators, I can't agree more. They are a wonderful and kind and generous bunch of people who keep this. The only real instruction I ever say to the moderators is this is about keeping the chat a safe space for everyone. So if you are there in the chat and if you're enjoying the debate and the discussion and the chat, then please just show the moderators a little bit of love there, because they do an amazing job. Zakalok saying, bonjour, Robert. Oh, bonjour. What do you think Elrond took the most from his elven side and from his human side? Why being an elf makes him so special in this story? Well, I think I've answered the second part of that, about why being a half elf makes him special in this story. He's special in this story not just because of the half elf thing, but because of the complexity of all of his ancestry. In terms of what did he take from each side, well, I think the elven side comes out the most. I think that he, as a character, if you weren't told that he was the half elven, he reads as quite an elven character. But in terms of the human side, part of the way that he's described does have hints of humanity about it. Humans are often like slightly more built. They're particularly in the Silmarillion, then some humans are greater warriors even than the elves. I think it's an element that comes across in the description of Elrond that perhaps doesn't come across on on the TV, I don't know what it'll be like on the TV show, but certainly in the films, this warrior side of him is there. I also think, without this wishing to sound sort of elf bashing, the elves tend to be slightly more focused in on themselves and suspicious of other races, let's put it that way. And Elrond is not. That, I think, is a lot more of a human, certainly Tolkien human characteristic. If you think of, for example, the way that the dwarves, Gimli, are treated in the elven places they go to. The dwarves go through North Mirkwood past Thranduil. They were not treated well by Thranduil. When Gimli comes to Lothlorien, the instinct of the elves is to blindfold him. Why on earth are you here? You can't see where we're going. Everyone else is okay, but not the dwarf. There is a lot of particularly towards dwarfs, but also other races, a lot of uncertainty and distrust. Aragorn created the last homely house. This was deliberately somewhere that everybody could come and gather and feel at home, and that is less of an elven trait than some others. Helma Arvixu saying, keep it up. Thank you very much. A lot of mod love going on, which is lovely. Reflective rambling saying, being careful of elf bashing, afraid the clueless fangirl will disown him. I mean, I don't mind being elf bashing. It's not elf bashing, it's an awareness of the way that Tolkien presents the elves is not always, although they're presented in a good way, when you actually read what how they act, it's not always great. Mona Lee saying or asking, could I remind us again what happened to Arwen's mother? This is Celebrian. So they met, Elrond and Celebrian met in the Second Age, late in the Second Age. She is the daughter of Galadriel and Celeborn. So they met, and early in the year 109 of the Third Age, they marry. They have the twin boys first, then Arwen, 100 or more years later. Elves take things slow. And for most of the Third Age, they seem to live very happily together in Rivendell. About 500 years before the events of the Lord of the Rings, she says, as appears to have been quite a regular kind of thing, I'm going to go see my mum. I'm going to go see the folks. That's in Lothlorien. She's obviously in Rivendell. In order to get to Lothlorien, she had to go across the Misty Mountains. Massive mountain range, which is a problem all the way through these stories we have. How do we get across the Misty Mountains? The main direct route is the Redhorn Pass. Now, this is the way that everyone, basically, if you don't want to go all the way down to the Gap of Rohan, the Gap of Rohan, this is the main way across. This is the way that the hobbits, originally when they migrated from east to west, they went across the Redhorn Pass, we're told. This is the dwarves head over. This is where Gandalf tries to take the Fellowship across. It's a dangerous route. It's the quickest route, but it's a dangerous route. Bad things happen. And a bad thing happened to Celebrian. The orcs got her. She got ambushed. Orcs captured her, and she was tortured, as far as we can tell. She received poisoned wound. Elladan and Elrohir come and rescue her, and they bring her back to Rivendell. They bring her back to Elrond, who is the greatest healer, and he uses his healing magic on her, and he heals her physically. But what happened to her caused spiritual wounds, caused mental wounds, and it's kind of skated over, but it's really quite tragic, is that she just decides, I don't want to live in Middle-earth anymore. In the same way that the sort of the slow wearying that I was talking about with the elves, that happens to all elves. At some point they decide they want to head west. For her, it was just a decision there. That's it. That's the time. I just don't want to stay here anymore. And so she went west. She went over to the Grey Havens. She stayed there for a year or so, where Círdan built a ship for her, and she sailed off to the west. So for the last 500 years or so of the Elrond's time, Middle-earth, then his wife was gone, and obviously his children had no mother. So she was there for a long time, but then she left. So when we're talking about Elrond staying around, which he does, this is him postponing his reunion with his wife, who he does see, obviously, at the very end when he takes the ship. He will meet her on the far side. Sam Day saying, no questions today. Wanted to do a massive thank you also to the moderators. I hope you're getting a lot of love today, because you do a fantastic job making this one of the most welcoming and fun communities on YouTube. I could not agree more. Mara Lee question saying, remind us again how Aragorn is related to Elrond in the books. Will we see anything of Elrond's relationship with his brother that will help foreshadow Aragorn's birth in the future? Well, just I'll take that off, actually, but I think you know the gist of it now. So Elrond's brother, Elros, was the first king of Numenor, and when so then his children and generations and generations and generations down are kings of Numenor. There is a slight tweak, or a couple of little slight tweaks, which means that when we get to Elendil, who was not a king of Numenor, but he was a direct line from Elros, simply because they sort of shifted sideways at one point in the dynasty. So we get Elendil, who is a direct descendant of Elros, 20-something generations later, and we get Isildur, therefore, is also the direct descendant of Elros. When we get across to the kings of Arnor in the north, and carrying all the way down to Aragorn, where I think it's something like 38 generations, I think, we go down from Elros down to Aragorn. So there's a huge long line, but at the end of that long line, we get Aragorn, who is the descendant of Elros. Elros being Elrond's brother, Elrond being Arwen's father. So the relationship we have is that Aragorn comes from this line of Numenorian kings, although he himself, or his ancestor up to Elendil, was not a Numenorian king. I hope that kind of sets the scene there. Will this help foreshadow Aragorn's birth in the future? Only in as much as we get Isildur, I think, as being the person that we will see right at the end. He will, I'm sure, be involved all the way through the TV show, but when we get him with the broken sword, that is what gets echoed with Aragorn. So that's the link that we've got going on there. Dan McKay asking, how is Elrond different in the books from in the movies? Well, this is an interesting one, because he is different, there's a lot similar, and I think that we have set in our minds. Hugo Weaving did a fantastic job, but that is very clearly set in our minds as what Elrond is like. But there are differences, and they're mostly negative differences, I have to say. Most of these come from the way that they wanted, this is my interpretation anyway, the way that they wanted Aragorn to be presented as having a more of a character arc. In terms of, in the movies, you'll remember he was not sure if he wanted to be king. He had a whole load of doubts. What if I'm like Isildur? And we get Arwen there. You are not Isildur. You are Isildur's heir. You're not fated to be the same as him. So there's a lot there that is sort of building up around this idea of who Aragorn is and what he wanted to be, and they wanted to create a much broader character arc for Aragorn. Now, what that built out to was the fact then that if he's doubting himself because of Isildur, then you have to make Isildur a character who is not that impressive. I did a video recently, if you're interested, which basically says that Isildur was done wrong in the movies. On the films, then he is there as a very, very fallible character, and we get Elrond. This is where it links in with Elrond. Is Elrond's there saying things like, "I was there when the strength of man failed." So we see Elrond then looking down a bit on Isildur and looking down a bit on humans more broadly, and this plays across to a lot of other things. He then does not want his daughter Arwen to be marrying Aragorn in the movies. He sort of tricks her into trying to get her to go over to sail west. He hides the fact that she's going to have a child with him. He doesn't want her to be marrying Aragorn. All of this is movie only stuff. And because we started with this kernel of Aragorn being, or trying to create a better character arc for Aragorn, we end up with Elrond having a much more dismissive view of humanity and the strength of humanity, and a much more manipulative approach to his daughter, and also much less enthusiastic about Aragorn becoming king. This is completely opposite to what happens in the books. In the books, he gives Aragorn the shards of Narsil when he comes of age, which is a sign he thinks that he is going to grow up to be the returning king. He thinks he's going to grow up to be the heir of Isildur. That is what he thinks. He sets Aragorn this huge task. He says, "You can't marry my daughter until you're the king of Gondor and Arnor," which sounds like this ridiculous task, but he believes that that's what Aragorn's going to do. He's not against this marriage. He just thinks that this is a spur to get Aragorn to be where he needs to be saving Middle-earth. So that is the big difference between Elrond in the books and Elrond in the films. In the films, he's much more dismissive of Aragorn. He's much more dismissive of humanity, and he's a lot worse to Arwen. So I hope that kind of answers it. I much prefer book Elrond to film Elrond. It has to be said. I didn't like that element. I particularly didn't like the way that he was trying to make Arwen go off to the west. That really didn't work for me. But as we're talking about sort of adaptations of Arwen, we should definitely talk about the Rings of Power, because we are going to see Aragorn in there. And Maralise asks, which actor will portray Elrond in the Rings of Power, and what kind of role do you think we will see him take during the series? So the actor is a guy called Robert Aramayo, who if you're a Game of Thrones fan, you will know. Excuse me one moment. He didn't have a huge role, but it was an important role. He played young Ned Stark. If you think about that flashback to the Tower of Joy, Ned Stark there, that was him. And just before we get into what they're going to do with the character, as an actor, as a young actor, for your first two main roles to be Ned Stark and Elrond, I mean, it's not a bad start, is it? So anyway, so Robert Aramayo is going to be playing him. That we have got a sentence from Amazon about what the character is on the show. A half-elf and politically ambitious young leader and architect who rises to prominence in the elven capital of Lindon. So that's what they're saying. Now, there's a lot to unpick and unpack there. We don't have the first thing to say is we don't have huge amounts of information from Tolkien about what he was up to during this period, or what he was like as a person. We're told that he grew as a healer and a law master. That's what we're told. We're not told this architect thing. I don't think that comes from Tolkien. I think this is new for the TV show. The politically ambitious young leader. This is a phrase I'm not 100% sure on. I have to say, because as we've seen, it depends what you mean by politically ambitious, but as we've seen, Elrond was pretty powerful already. Political is a weird phrase to use for the elves, but in terms of who was more obviously elf noble and leadership material during the Second Age, well, yes, you've got Gil-galad. Círdan largely keeps to himself. We've got Celebrimbor and Galadriel, who both from a high Noldorin stock. And then you get this handful of other people like Celeborn and the leadership of the North Mirkwood elves. But that's pretty much it. It's not a hugely long list. Elrond, as the son of Erendil, is up there already. In fact, when we get to the Third Age, we'll have a question on this in a moment, but when we get to the Third Age, he probably, with Gil-galad's death, he probably could have claimed the title High King. So politically ambitious for himself, it doesn't seem to fit his person. He doesn't seem to be a politically ambitious person for himself, and doesn't quite work in terms of his character. Whether this, when politically ambitious, means that he wishes to be a diplomat with other nations, with other peoples. He's got an ambitious program that he wishes to be pursuing. I can buy into that, and the hints are there. What we've seen from the teaser trailer we had looked like him in Moria, so sort of making connections there with the dwarfs. So yes, possibly. Him rising to prominence in the elven capital of Lindon, yes, he was already prominent, so I don't think he needed to rise to prominence, which sounds like I'm nitpicking, but because it really depends, I think, on what they do with him and as a character, because we've got Gil-galad, who is a great elven king, and wise. We've got Galadriel, who is Galadriel, but will be younger and more ambitious herself and more proud. Certainly in her early years, she was described as being proud and brash. That's not quite the word, but of Amazonian disposition. So she's definitely going to be a lot more of an action figure. If Elrond is the elf who sort of moves around a lot and ties everything together in this plot, because he's the person who is talking to different peoples, gathering information. Yeah, I can go with that. That would work for me. There will need to be characters, or at least a character that does that, because the one of the problems they face in talking about the Second Age is that most of these people stay roughly where they are. Gil-galad, unless he's going to war against Sauron, stays in Lindon. Círdan stays in the Grey Havens. Galadriel, her movements are a lot more vague, but we certainly got Celebrimbor, starts off in Lindon, heads over to a place just outside the doors to the Misty Mountain, to Moria, sets up camp there, pretty much stays there. The Númenóreans, yes, they will expand out a little bit, but basically they stay on Númenor. So a lot of these people are quite static. You need someone who can tie these strands of story together. Maybe that's going to be Elrond. We'll see. He is a younger elf at this time. Time contraction, we're still not 100% sure exactly how that's going to work, but he was born very late in the First Age. So when we reach the Second Age, as an elf, he is still a young elf, so he should be quite active. Let's go to TDHF saying, "Hi Robert, just watching through a bunch of your content which I hadn't yet seen and absolutely loving it. Thank you. Heading back to the playlist now. Have a fun stream." Well, if you have to leave the live stream, then going to to one of my playlists is, I can't really complain, can I? Thank you very much for that. Andrew K saying, "I know you cannot say much about what you saw, but did you get any content for that seeming Elrond rock-breaking scene, or is it just some silliness?" Yeah, so I did, for those who missed this bit of news, I did get to see some... I can't even remember what phrase I'm supposed to use for this. Footage, that's the word. I didn't get to see any actual episodes of this. Amazon invited a few YouTubers, academics, and the like to show some advanced bits of footage from season 1. So I'm not yet allowed to say exactly what I saw, but I'm happy to say I did not see any rock breaking competitions. So no, I can't comment on that one at all yet. Reflective Ramblings saying, "A great idea for your video inspiration list from Cloaked One. Would Aragorn have regained his kingship without Elrond's insistence or influence?" Yeah, interesting. Maybe I should make a video of that. Would he have regained his kingship? No, I think is the short answer, because Elrond, I don't think I've got any specific questions on this, so I'm very happy to talk a bit more in detail on this one. So Elrond's role vis-a-vis Arnor is fascinating. Now, part of this, I'm sure, is his affinity with the Númenórean line that is effectively family. But generation after generation, he took in and fostered the next in line of Isildur's line, and kept them secret, and kept all of their family heirlooms safe, and kept them safe until they grew to full manhood and could then go out and become a proper Dunedain ranger. And he did that with every generation. Now, that was a dangerous part of the world, and most of those people were sort of died in action, so to speak. This is what certainly happened with Arathorn, Aragorn's father. And so probably without Elrond's creation of a sort of a home base in exile for the kings of Arnor, which is basically what he did. Without that, I think probably the line would have died out. In terms of Aragorn specifically, my general take is, yeah, he created the environment for Aragorn and to prosper, and he taught him huge amounts. He taught him healing arts, which definitely helped him later on trying to persuade people the hands of a king or the hands of a healer and all of that. He learned a lot of tracking. He made friends with Elrohir and Elladan. There's a lot that he got, and I think the confidence that comes from having Elrond, with all of his magnificent ancestry, basically saying, I think you will be the king of a united Gondor and Arnor. That has to do wonders for you. It's a hard thing to put your finger on, but yeah, undoubtedly. And I will add that to my list. It is a long list of video questions. One thing I never have a problem with is inspiration for video ideas. Lyle Hammock, picking up again on the Rings of Power question. Hello, Robert. What do you think we will see out of Elrond in the Rings of Power? In other words, what will his arc be in the show? And do you think we will see his courtship of Celebrian? Also, what do you want to see fleshed out about Elrond most in the Rings of Power and the Second Age? Well, I've sort of answered, I think, most of the first bit. In terms of his courtship of Celebrian, I think we should at least see them meet. And I think this should be a link across to Galadriel. They'll definitely want to link those two characters, Elrond and Galadriel. Indeed, we've seen a picture of the two of them together already, one of the released pictures. What do I want to see fleshed out about Elrond most? So there are a few things here, because Elrond as a character hasn't got as strong a character arc as many of Tolkien's other characters. Galadriel, for example, has a hugely strong character arc. She starts out as this incredibly proud, brash character, wanting power for herself, charging around, but ending up to a point where she gets this power, but she realizes this is actually about sacrifice. And this is where that wonderful moment when Frodo offers her that ring, and we get Kate Blanchett does it so well with when she resists temptation of taking the ring. That is her reaching the culmination of her character arc. Can she resist this call to power? Yes. She shall remain Galadriel, diminish and head into the west. That is her reaching the culmination of it. So she's got this amazing character arc. Elrond, his character arc isn't fleshed out as much. He's got all of this wonderful ancestry. We know where he goes as a character, but he stays sort of on a level. And that's partly because we don't get much character breakdown and analysis of him as a younger elf. So I think what I would want is some sort of unpacking there about his character. Now, this is this is very hard work, because how do you show character growth for a character like Elrond whilst staying true to that character? It would be a very hard thing to do. So I think they've got a tough job doing this. But there's definitely something there about mortality, and also about his brother. The time contraction, we don't know in the Second Age how this is going to work, but his brother was, for the first 400 years, the king of Numenor. So Elrond will have a very strong link across to Numenor. I'd love to see that played out. How does he feel about what happens with his brother's legacy? His brother set them off on such an amazing path, and then we had the rise and then the fall of Numenor. How does that impact on Elrond? Surely that has to hurt him, the way that they're taking his brother's greatest crowning glory and just doing it down. That has to hurt. That would be a fascinating thing to uncover. And this idea of mortality, him choosing the elf life, meaning that he is there while people around him die, including his brother, that has to have some impact on him. He is not just another elf who lives forever and doesn't, maybe you might be able to ignore some human lives coming and going. Elrond will be very aware of the differences between his lifespan and the lifespan of others because of what happened with his brother. Reflective Rambling, thank you very much. Picking up for Julian Manev, saying, could you perhaps discuss if Elrond and Elros had any communication after their choice? Thank you. And I have a missed super chat. Have I? I'll see if I can flick back and try and find it. I found the other thing. But in terms of whether they had any communication, we're not told that they did. But as I say, there's a huge amount of just grey space in the history of the early years, in particular, of the Second Age. The Tolkien doesn't tell us much at all about what happens in the first few hundred years. We have the establishment of Numenor, its growth, and then it's only really once there are a few kings in that we start to hear about them, and they expanded out and they set up a colony here and so on. We hear about the contact with Círdan, with Eldarion, the mariner from the Mariner's Wife, but that's the fifth, by the time of the fifth king. So the short answer is no, we're not told about much. There must have been, there absolutely surely must have been. The Palantir, I will be fascinated in the show whether they go down this route at all. But we have the Palantir. These are elven things. These are Noldorian constructs. These are Feanor made these. That they allow interaction between people, and we know that they ended up coming from Numenor across and brought across with Elendil and co. But maybe some of the elves, maybe that they weren't always for all of that 3,500 years on Numenor. Maybe there was a time when one of them was over on the mainland. That would certainly make sense. Means of a communication was definitely possible, is what I'm saying, and it would be a shock and a surprise if they weren't in contact. We just do not have the evidence for it. Kartik Prabhu saying, tinfoil, Elrond equals Agent Smith, Neo equals Morgoth trying to escape his prison. Matrix is set during Dagor Dagarath. Good theory. I mean, yeah, anyone of my sort of age, it is impossible to watch The Matrix without thinking bad Elrond. Elrond equals Agent Smith, Neo equals Morgoth. I don't. Morgoth escaped to treat this. So I know you did this as a tongue-in-cheek post, but Morgoth for the first few years of many decades, centuries of the First Age was in Angband, basically under siege, but it was like a very long, slow, ineffective siege because he was there and he basically just used all this time to build up his army and invent a whole load of things like dragons. And this was not an effective siege. This just was basically Morgoth biding his time all this time and then exploded out. And once he felt that he got the upper hand, and he was right, he then went out and one after another took out all of these different elven settlements. So different to Neo in terms of trying to escape his prison, certainly in Matrix 1. I've not seen the most recent Matrix, actually. That was an oversight on my part. Then Neo was very unaware of him being in a prison. Kartik Prabhu saying, completely missed my stupid tinfoil. Not stupid tinfoil, but I'm glad I picked it up again. Question. So Auden Lelo saying, I've heard that elves don't marry during war, but many elves and half-elves do, including many of Elrond's ancestors. Do you know why this is? Well, so elves do everything slowly. I think the idea is that they wouldn't. They would like to marry in a time of peace. But the First Age was pretty much entirely a time of war. So any elf marriages that happened during that time, this was a time of war. I don't think this is a hard and fast rule about not marrying during times of war. Question from Catherine Furseth. Hi, Robert. Could you please talk a bit about Elrond's gift of foreseeing the future? Gandalf seems to feel or sense that something or someone will be important later, such as Gollum. How are these powers of foresight the same or differ? Yeah, so Elrond, interesting question. Elrond also seems to have these moments of foresight. He certainly seems to have this foresight when it comes to Aragorn. He seems to have this foresight. I wish I'd got the quote in front of me, but you'll remember it when he talks, when Frodo says, you know, I will take the ring, though I do not know the way. And then Elrond sort of does this wonderful small speech about how the hour for the Shire folk has come, and this is the time for the humble, and he is very clear on this. It was right for Frodo to take it because it is the right hour. The time has come. He has this kind of feel. He also, and I will do a video on this one probably in my my series, which people seem to be enjoying. I'm doing a series, if you've not come across them, a series of videos on Lord of the Rings from different people's perspectives. So just trying to see from Sauron's perspective, what did he know, when, how did that impact on what he did? And it's really interesting to see, because this is such a wonderfully and intricately interwoven scheme of different characters that come together to create the Lord of the Rings. You can break it down to individual characters and say, what's the story look like from their perspective? And I've done 3 so far: Saruman, Sauron, and Gandalf. I'll be doing Galadriel next, but I'm also going to do Elrond. And in this, I think one of the most fascinating things to dig into is his sort of promptings from the side. He does this every now and then. He'll like say, okay, let's send a banner. a banner proclaiming, basically proclaiming Aragorn's kingship. Let's say, oh, Aragorn, don't forget, there's the paths of the dead over there. You could go that way. His sort of promptings through his sons when they come all the way down and they're deciding what to do with after the Battle of the Pelennor Fields. He's sort of pushing things from afar, just nudging stuff in certain directions. All of this is him having some degree of foresight. Now, I will also do a video at some point on the much bigger issue of foresight. Can characters see the future? The short answer, I think, is that there are some characters who they can't see the future, but it's almost as if they can sort of see a fuzzy corridor going forward. They know roughly where they're going. They can see some glimpses. They can see some things that are going to be important. The famous thing, Catherine, you're referring to with Gandalf and Gollum, is when he's sort of saying, I feel he has a role yet to play, for good or ill. And that's Gandalf, he's got a sense of what's coming. Elrond seems the same. He's got a sense of what's coming. Where does this come from? Well, some of this is a lot of characters. You will see when Tolkien writes something like, I feel in my heart that. That's generally a character having some kind of sense of what's going to happen in the future. And a lot of characters like Theoden say this a couple of times, and he's right as well, this sort of foresight. But I think for characters like Gandalf and also Elrond, because Gandalf is a Maya and Elrond has some Maya ancestry to him as well, there's another layer to this, because we have to remember that the start of all this is digging deep into the beginning of the Silmarillion. The first thing that God Uluvatar did was to create the Ainur, and the Ainur then sort of sang, and at his guidance, and as they sang, they saw the unfolding of creation, and they then Eru did the creation, made it, and some of the Ainur went down into it, thinking that this had all happened, but actually they then had to make the creation happen. They were sub-creators on Eru's part. Now, they didn't understand everything, because not everything that they had sung and seen was clear to them, but they did have this outline idea about what was going to happen. The Ainur are the angelic spirits and beings. The Valar, yes, but also the Maiar. So Gandalf and Melian, they were there at the singing at the beginning, the creative singing. And whereas they will not know all of the details, they do have some of this understanding that has passed down to them. So, can Elrond see the future? I don't think he can see the future, but he is wise, and he has part of his heritage, this Maya understanding of where the future is going. Antonine, when saying, why do you think only Melian fell in love with a non-Ainur out of all the Maya? That is an excellent question, and it's the kind of thing I might make a video on at some point. So why was Melian there to start with? All of the Maya and the Valar who are there to start with in Middle Earth was because they were fascinated and in love with what they'd seen and experienced and wanted to be in and part of it. Melian and Gandalf, I think, is the same, seem to be even more enraptured by Middle Earth. They are. This was in the recent book, The Nature of Middle-earth, sort of unearthed some more of Tolkien's writings, and it's very clear that some of the Maiar were there over helping out at the very beginning when the elves first arrived. They were sort of there in Middle-earth. We know that's where Melian first appears there, and now we kind of understand a little bit more that that's what they may well have volunteered to help out, to be there. So she was doubly fascinated and interested in the creation of Middle-earth, and she sang a song. It's in many ways it's a little bit sort of creepy. She sings a song that basically puts Thingol the elf under a spell for centuries. He's there under a spell that she has cast, and then eventually they kind of fall in love. So the link is there that she is with him for a very long time, and in a way that someone like, say, Gandalf never really settles down. That's not what he's about. She does stay in one place for a very long period of time. She appears to be a different character to some of the, in the same way that Radagast has a character of his own. She has her own character. Yes, she's an angelic being, but her character seems to be a lot more about just loving the creation that's there and the people. So that seems to be what it is, just that she's a different person. Dan McKay asking, has Elrond always been good and infallible, or does he have flaws, and has he made mistakes? Interesting. So my take is he is, with the caveat that I've given before, that we don't have huge amounts of information about him from, say, the Second Age when he's a younger elf. He seems to have always been good, in the sense that his motivations always seem to be relatively pure. Not in the movies, as we said, his motivations there seem not to be so pure, but book Elrond, definitely his motivations seem broadly to have always been pure. But infallible, no, I don't think so at all. So we've already got one example we've talked about. He could not heal his wife. He clearly wanted to. He could not do that. That was a limit to his capabilities and abilities. If you go to the attack on Second Age, when Sauron was overrunning Eriador, Elrond went in there. He was ordered to by Gil-galad, but sounds like he was keen, and he went in, and he basically couldn't achieve what he wanted to do. He wanted to go in and help protect Celebrimbor and Celebrimbor's people, but failed. This was, we don't know the details, but this is a fallibility on his part. And also, even when we get to the Council of Elrond, yes, he's great and good and wise, but he seems a little bit uncertain about Merry and Pippin. Now, you can understand why. I mean, would you really, if you're handpicking your team of 9 to be heading off, Merry and Pippin wouldn't be top of your list, perhaps. But they turn out to be hugely important. So, yes, he's got some degree of foresight, but that didn't come through immediately. So he's not infallible. He does make mistakes. He does have oversights, but his heart does always seem to be in the right place. Daniel Adams saying, hi, Robert, love your channel. Do you believe Elrond could communicate telepathically over distance? So would he have taken counsel with Gandalf after the Pelennor Fields battle? Okay, so telepathy is an interesting one. I've done a video on this. I think I based it around Gandalf, because this is, I called it something like Gandalf read minds. Elrond is one of the group who, after the end of all of this, there's a gang of them. Gandalf, Elrond, Celeborn, and Galadriel all travel together. And there's this wonderful passage that Tolkien writes about how they, in the evening, they would sit by the fireside completely still, conversing with each other silently, basically with the power of their minds. And he doesn't really elaborate on that. But then you dig into a few other things and you realize that, yes, that does seem to be a thing that some people can do. Gandalf certainly seems to be able to read minds. Galadriel can read minds, and that's not just a so if you can read somebody's mind, they can read your mind, then it's a sort of a form of telepathy. We don't know the limits. Tolkien was incredibly vague about his magic system. Partly because he cared far more about magic than far more about language than he did about things like magic. Partly for in-world reasons, which is that magic was just a natural way of how the world operated. So when you talk about Sam's comes to Lothlorien and he's there thinking about elf magic, and then Galadriel saying, I don't really understand what you mean by elf magic, but here's a thing that I think probably, she's taking them to the Mirror of Galadriel, probably you'll think of as magical. So she doesn't really understand this concept of magic, and that's how Tolkien likes it, is very vague, because this is just a natural thing that certain people can do. So can Elrond talk telepathically? Yes, we have evidence that he can. What distance can he do it over? I think it's probably fair to say that there are limits on this, because the whole action of the story would have changed hugely if Elrond and Galadriel and Gandalf could, regardless of where they were, always be in communication with each other. That clearly is not happening. So there is a limit there somewhere. In terms of, I think you were asking specifically, after the Pelennor Fields, he sends his children there. So Elladan and Elrahir go there and speak on his behalf. And again, it's kept a bit vague whether or not this is he is speaking through them in some way. Maybe he can find it easier to communicate with through his sons than others. It's not clear. I wouldn't want to overstep this, because Tolkien doesn't want us to overstep this. Yes, he can speak telepathically with others, but we're not told the extent or limits of that. Martin S, thank you very much, saying Elrond has to be an extremely potent healer by Third Age standards. Even Aragorn with Athelas could not drive out the Morgul blade. Yes, he is. He is the greatest healer, basically. It's often over, and it's not just him. He was known right from early in the Second Age as being a lawmaster and a healer. So this is a natural thing for him already. Something he's learnt the skills of. He's had thousands of years to get good at this. But also, we've not talked about it much, but his ring, the Ring of Air, is the most powerful ring. It's just a throwaway line, but it's the most powerful ring. Now, that means it's more powerful than Gandalf's, and it's more powerful than Galadriel's. What powers does it have? We don't see them hugely. Yes, it protects Rivendell from outside interference, but what else does it do? I think healing is a part of this. This is why, and Gandalf talks, he is the greatest healer. I think the power of the ring helps him with that. The Morgul blade, even he could get it out. It took him a while to figure out exactly what was going on there, but he did manage to extract it. Yes, he is a great healer, but also the Lawmaster thing comes in here. He was around during the time the Morgul blade uses technology, surely that's going back to Angmar, and he understands that he has faced this. He was there in battles with the Witch King. So Aragorn is a healer, but Aragorn had 80 years and to learn his art. Elrond 7,000 years, give or take. So he was a mighty healer indeed. Question from Lyle Hammock. Why did Elrond not pursue the kingship of the Noldor? Gil-galad had no children, and Elrond had as strong a claim as anyone through his lineage. Also, he was respected as the closest advisor and herald of Gil-galad, so I doubt he would have been opposed. So why do you think he didn't? So this is at the beginning of the Third Age. Gil-galad is dead. Gil-galad was universally acknowledged as the High King of the Elves of the West, the High King of the Noldor. After Gil-galad, it fell into disuse. The title fell into disuse. And I think that is the important... Well, there are two important points here, I think. That's one of the important points, is that the amount... It fell into disuse because the amount of elves dropped dramatically. Now, the High King of the Noldor, the Elves of the West, what were the Elves of the West? Lindon, in and of itself, basically stopped existing. We get the Grey Havens, still were there. You get Rivendell, still was there. The Eriador with Celebrimbor, that all had gone. You get Lothlorien, but clearly we get Galadriel. They had their own king, and then Galadriel and Celeborn took over after that. We get Thranduil in Mirkwood. He wasn't under that remit. So what would High King of the Elves of the West mean? Rivendell and the Grey Havens. It's lost its importance as a title. There is no... Rivendell is not a city. It's not even a town. It's small enough that you can call it a house, the last homely house. It's there. It's significant. There are people there, but you can be a lord of that. Calling yourself king feels a little bit over and above yourself. And Círdan is basically a law unto himself. Yes, he was part of the Elves of the West, but he was old, very, very old and wise, and ran his own shop, basically. So the importance of the role was no longer there. But that's the first point. The second point is, I think this shows us about his character. Yes, he could have claimed the title. He could have taken it on. It probably wouldn't have gained him much, but he could have had that title. He didn't want it. He's not there looking for glory for himself. He's not there looking for power. He's just wanting to have his... I mean, he doesn't even try and expand his territories, really. He just stays in this little this sort of valley in the mountains. That's it. That's his area. And he's happy with that. And this tells us a lot about Elrond. He is not there seeking power. He is there to serve. That is what it is. So why didn't he? Because it would have been pretty pointless. And he didn't want it. He didn't want to be king. AK Watch saying, "Hey Robert, just coming through to show some love." Alicia Kingston. Hi there. Great to see you. For those who do not know, Alicia is a wonderful YouTuber, internet personality, beyond compare, I would say. A wonderful human being as well. I've got a couple more questions from my patrons, now is probably a good time to drop any more questions you've got into the chat. I will try and pick up as many of them as I can. But let's go to a question from Mara Lee saying, I agree with Sean Gunner, who was on, he was president of the Tolkien Society, who was on here a few weeks ago. Sean, if you're watching, you have a fan. I agree with Sean Gunner that the showrunners might end the last season of the show with Isildur holding the One Ring and then fade to black. Between you and I, if they are not able to get Cate Blanchett to do a voiceover to tie the show with the movies, would they at least consider getting Hugo Weaving to do it? Either would be fabulous. They would. So Hugo Weaving and Cate Blanchett did fantastic jobs. In terms of, this is for the TV show, where will it end? This is the story of the Rings of Power, the Second Age show. It will end at the end of the Second Age, which is when we have the last alliance of elves and men. Basically, that scene, that flashback at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, the big battle against Sauron, Isildur cutting the ring from Sauron's finger. At some point in there, they will choose what is the dramatic shot to end that TV show, that story that they've been telling, and link it forward to the Lord of the Rings. It would work. What Sean was very persuasively suggesting was that it would work really well if the last shot was Isildur grabbing the ring and holding it in his hand. And we all know what happens next. So we don't need much. Would it work with a Cate Blanchett or Hugo Weaving voiceover? It would. I think it would work without it as well. If they've done it well, I think that it would. The power of that moment would be in seeing that happen and knowing all of the implications of it. Hugo Weaving, I believe, has said that he does not ever want to go back to Elrond. Not that he didn't like the character. He thought it was fantastic. He just thinks that moment for him is now gone. So I don't think we will get Elrond back. I mean, there are some people who very happily have said, like Ian McKellen is like, no one else can be Gandalf. Well, only I'm Gandalf. So not that Gandalf should appear in the Second Age, but there are some characters who will happily come back. Some actors would happily come back. Hugo Weaving appears to be one of those who thinks that's it. I've done that now. I'm now moving on. Caius Ballerina saying, how did Elrond's relationship with his in-laws change over time, especially after the departure of his wife? Well, we're not told the details of this. It's an interesting question, but it seems to have been positive all the way through. We don't hear of any arguments between them. And what we do read of is, despite, what you might have thought could happen, a perfectly rational response to Celebrian being attacked en route from Rivendell over to Lothlorien to go and see Galadriel, is to when Arwen said, I want to go and see Galadriel, to say no. But that doesn't seem to have happened. She goes over at least twice. She goes over there. And in fact, this is where she and Aragorn fell in love, was in Lothlorien. They spent I think it was a season together there, and they fell in love in Lothlorien as guests of Galadriel. So there seems to have been a very positive relationship. And Galadriel, certainly she's giving gifts to Aragorn of encouraging the marriage, and that seems to be similar to what Elrond was at. They seem to have been of one mind. They were working together as well in terms of on the White Council. We don't hear of any, but it doesn't appear to be that all that close, as in definite or constant contact, but there does seem to be an established way of getting messages to and fro. For example, when the Fellowship arrive in Lothlorien, and they get there, and I think it's Celeborn says, there's only 8 of you. The messages said that there were 9 who left Rivendell. What happened? So clearly there's a method of communication that is faster than people just walking across, because they went reasonably swiftly. Yes, there was like the stopping and starting, trying to get across the Misty Mountains, but they weren't that long doing it. So whether they've got some sort of homing pigeons or something, who knows? But they've got a way of communicating between those 2 places. So yeah, there's no indication it was a bad relationship, and every indication it was a positive one. Kaios Ballerina, this is for Kletos now, saying Elrond was eager for Isildur to throw the ring into the fires, but doesn't mention that the elves would have left Middle-earth. Would the elves be forced to leave then? Did he know this? Well, so would they have been forced to leave? Did he know it? I don't think so. The elves were not forced to leave, is the short answer. They what would have happened with the One Ring being destroyed was, when that was destroyed, that meant that the power of the rings that Elrond and Galadriel had also ended. So that bit of their power would have gone. So they probably then, yes, they would have Elrond, perhaps he might have thought, okay, that is time, I can now go, if Sauron has gone. But if he didn't feel, if he personally hadn't had that kind of calling to go, then no. Galadriel as well, I know you weren't asking about Galadriel, we were talking about Elrond, but Galadriel by that point had not been solely running a kingdom. At her time, she would not have had the thing that she'd been eagerly desiring to do, which is have power to run a kingdom for herself. So her own personal arc would not have reached an end. I think, yes, he will have been aware of the impact on the rings. I think he will have been aware of what that would imply for what would happen to Rivendell, but which was his base at the time. But this was before he married, so before he had children. Presumably he was in love at the time. He had met Celebrian. I suspect that he would have still hung around for a little while before heading back. At some point, he was always going to head back. Last question from one of my patrons, Diego Godoy. Could I suggest, this is slightly off Elrond's topic, but a good question. Could I suggest you make a video explaining which are the 2 towers of the book, The Two Towers? I've never really understood that. And this is an absolutely great question, because a lot of people don't really understand that. And it's okay to not really understand that, for the simple reason that Tolkien himself was confused. This is a fascinating thing, and I for many years I was the same. It's that there are lots of different possible. Which towers are they? I did a little bit of digging up to get a couple of quotes, because the story here is fascinating. If you have also been wondering what the 2 towers are, the correct answer, such as it is, as in the answer that we end up with, is that the 2 towers are Barad-dûr, Sauron's home base, and Orthanc, Saruman's home base. That's where we end up. And this kind of the theme of the central book is, therefore, these are the 2 antagonists, and so that is what they're doing, drives a huge amount of the action in the second book. the action is both what's happening up around Saruman and Rohan and Fangorn, and also what's happening down around Mordor and Gondor. So those are the two broad arenas, and that is the two big baddies. But the history of this, why those two towers, is a little partly amusing, partly confusing. It starts out Tolkien. He seems to have come up. We haven't got this exactly, but he seems to have been forced into choosing a name for the middle part of this story, and rather hurriedly coming up with the name, The Two Towers, because for him this was all one big book. It was being published in 3 parts, but this was all one big book, The Lord of the Rings. Pardon me. The Fellowship of the Ring is a relatively straightforward first title. He seems to have been okay with that. He got pushed into coming up with a name, The Two Towers. Then he seems to have second-guessed himself and decided that he doesn't really like it. And he has this ongoing correspondence with Lorena Unwin, who are the publishers of this. And a couple of times in letters, he sort of just briefly mentions, I'm not 100% happy with the title here. And then we get, this is him writing a quote, "I am not at all happy about the title, The Two Towers. It must, if there is any real reference in it to Volume 2, refer to Orthanc and the Tower of Cirith Ungol. But since there is so much made of the basic opposition of the Dark Tower and Minas Tirith, that seems very misleading." So he basically says, having come up with this idea of the two towers, I'm now trying to think which two towers could this be. Well, if we're looking at what the story itself is about, then the Orthanc, yes, but Cirith Ungol, which is this is the way that Frodo and Sam make their way into Mordor. Cirith Ungol is the way where eventually Frodo, when Sam thinks he's dead, is taken by the orcs. So that's his original thought, is it must be a reference to those two. But then he thinks that on a more conceptual level, people might think, when reading The Two Towers, they might think that this is the Dark Tower, Barad-dûr, and Minas Tirith, because they're set up in opposition so much. So he got confused himself about what this could possibly be. But they stuck with it, and eventually he seems to have come round to, in later editions of the Fellowship of the Ring, he added in, and it might even be in the version, your version, feel free to have a look, he added in a sort of a little preview about what's coming up in the next volume. So after you finish reading The Lord of the Rings, then it says, the second part is called The Two Towers, since the events recounted in it are dominated by Orthanc, the citadel of Saruman, and the fortress of Minas Morgul that guards the secret entrance to Mordor. So that seems to be where he sort of ended up on it, but he wasn't 100% sure himself. So if you've ever wondered what the two towers are, do not despair, because Tolkien wondered what the two towers were. As I say, the answer that we seem to have come to is Orthanc and Barad-dûr, but it's by no means straightforward. Let's get to some questions from the chat. Kartik Prabhu saying, this is picking up for Kelly Summers, saying, why couldn't Elrond and the other ring bearers find the One Ring after Isildur lost it? They knew the general area and it didn't get far before Gollum found it much later. Well, this is... It seemed to evade a lot of people, basically. They knew the general area, yes. But also, in a river, the river is flowing. It's a very wide and very strong current river. This is an important plot point in terms of why Isildur was trying to cross it and was struggling to cross it. It was a very strong current, so they didn't know exactly. It could have flowed down current. At one point, Saruman says it's washed all the way out to sea, and that seems reasonable. But I think the biggest answer here is the ring did not want to be found. My take on why the ring fell off of Isildur's finger is that Isildur was taking it to Elrond. We read that he had taken it, but he'd not taken it in the way that the movies want us to think in order to go off conquering. He thought that he could control it himself, and then after a year he realized he couldn't, and decided he was going to take it to Elrond and give it to Elrond because he thought Elrond will know what to do with this. He was actively trying to give up the One Ring, and Elrond, we know, would have wanted to destroy the One Ring. Therefore, the One Ring had this one chance to escape. It did not want to go to Elrond. It did not want to be found. So it got off of Isildur's ring, and it's burrowed its way down to the bottom of the river. So could they have hunted for it? Yeah, I do not doubt that they did. They couldn't find Isildur's body to start with. And the river, imagine like a huge wide river, whatever wide river might be in your country. Think of the Danube, the Ganges, the Thames, Mississippi, whatever it is. Think of a wide river. This is what the River Anduin is like. This is a huge river, and try and imagine they didn't have a modern dredging techniques. This was hard work. They couldn't find it. It was lodged at the very bottom, hidden under mud. This was not going to be found. So that's why, and the ring itself did not wish to be found. It made itself found by Gollum. It made itself found by Bilbo because it wished to move on. Karis Ballerina picking up for Averon, God of Fire. If Sauron remained undefeated and kind of missing, would Elrond stay till he was defeated, or would he eventually leave for the west? Interesting question. So I think it's the nature of Sauron was never to just sit still and not try and conquer the world. He tried lots of different ways to do it, but he was always trying to conquer the world. So as long as Sauron was alive, Elrond would have known that his aim was to have mastery over the free peoples of Middle-earth. So I think Elrond would have stayed around. When you say undefeated and kind of missing, the kind of, if you're referring to when he was sort of in as the necromancer in Southern Mirkwood, there was this feeling that the wise got of the growing shadow. The shadow is a very Tolkien kind of phrase for evil rising, and you can't get rid of it. And there was, all through the Third Age, there was this slight uneasiness amongst the wise, is that we know Sauron's still around somewhere, and that's why the Valar sent the Astari, Gandalf and co. Glorfindel had been sent back in the Second Age. There was unfinished business, and I think Elrond was foresighted enough to know that, and Sauron was who he was and would never have just sit around not doing anything. Martin S. I've always felt Elrond's attitude towards Aragorn was a bit different in the Peter Jackson movies from the novels. Slightly more condescending, maybe. Yeah, I talked about this in a reasonable amount of depth bit earlier when I was talking about the differences between the two. Yes, condescending, but this was built off the fact that Aragorn did not wish to be king in the Peter Jackson movies and had to be sort of persuaded into it, which is not the case in the books. And they also made Isildur a lot worse in the movies, so that Aragorn had a more dismissive attitude towards not just Aragorn, but humanity as a whole. Humans are weak. Humans fail. This is not the Aragorn of the books. Aragorn of the books hosts the last homely house. This is where people can gather. Everyone seems welcome. He has hobbits and dwarves. He has wizards. He has elves. He has humans. They can all gather there. This is the Aragorn we have in the stories. He is not condescending to people. His brother was a human. He's not going to be dismissive of humans. Cast Ballerina, just going through some chat questions now. For Cat Wellham, why do you think Elrond insisted that Aragorn retain his kingship before marrying Arwen? Well, there's a sort of a Tolkien meta narrative going on here, which is linking across to Beren and Luthien. So Beren and Luthien being the sort of the original human man, elf woman marriage, and Thingol, the king there, was like, you can only marry my daughter if you go and achieve this impossible thing, get a Silmaril. And everybody was laughing. Go and get a Silmaril. How silly is that? He's never going to. And Beren went, all right. And then went off and did it with some help, obviously, from Luthien and Huan, the best dog in Middle-earth. So that idea of you can only win the hand of my daughter if you do this impossible thing is echoed in what Elrond says. The difference is that Elrond is not sniggering behind his hand and saying this is he genuinely thinks that that Aragorn will do it. He genuinely thinks that Aragorn will achieve this thing. Why? It's an incentive for Aragorn to go off and achieve his goals, to go off and become a king in order to marry Arwen. I think there is a layer there of Elrond as a dad going, you know what? My daughter's worth it. My daughter's amazing. My daughter's marrying no one less than the king of Arnor and Gondor. That's I think there is an element there of Elrond just saying, prove your worth, my daughter. But there are more layers than that. Reflective Rambling saying, what are the chances that seeing Elrond's origins in the Rings of Power will allow us to see more of his future counselors, such as Erestor, as probably the only fan of such a minor character? I hope so. I would love to say, and this is something which I'm pretty sure we're not going to have in the first season or two of the Rings of Power, but I would love to see the establishment of Rivendell. I would love to see that. We should see that when he creates Imladris, and that should mean bringing his team together. We've been told this sort of cast list of whatever it is, 20-something main characters. There will be more. There has to be more characters around and about. The problem that they have, this probably won't be a problem in this instance, is the rights issue. They currently have rights to the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, including the appendices to the Lord of the Rings, rather than the Silmarillion. So any of these extra characters that are in the Silmarillion if they're just mentioned in the Silmarillion, then they might well not be able to bring them across. But in terms of Elrond's sort of court, as it were, then those characters, if they're mentioned in the Lord of the Rings, then they should be allowed in. I am desperate for Glorfindel. He was it still rankles. I know this is a small thing in the sort of the Peter Jackson verse, but the fact that Glorfindel was excluded from those movies, I just want him to have his moment in the sun. I really do. Andrew K saying, always found Elrond to be super resilient in spite of all his traumas, separation, and loss of lots of family, wars, etc. He stays very much on the side of good, even proactively. So, yeah, absolutely. I agree. Reflective rambling picking up for Lenore Miller. Thank you very much. Saying, is it ever said what Elladan and Elrahir chose? In the books, they didn't sail with Elrond, but I can't remember if they ever sailed after. That's a really good question. I think that we're told. I'm just going to double. I can quickly check this now. We're not told. No. So they. I couldn't remember whether we're told or not. Categorically, we're not told. So they returned to Rivendell, but after Rivendell, the elves do all leave. Rivendell itself slowly becomes abandoned, and the implication is that they do head off to the west because they've not chosen the mortal life. But we're not told that specifically. Tolkien actually, when we get to like the Fourth Age, after what happens in The Lord of the Rings, details get quite sketchy quite quickly with a lot of the characters. I have done a video on what happens after The Lord of the Rings, but there are a lot of characters that you'd love to know what happened, and Tolkien just doesn't tell us because that was the end of the story. But yeah, so they go back to Rivendell. We're not told what choice they make, but the implication is that they head back as elves because that is the default for them. This is, as I say, this is what the next generation down, that seems to be the situation for them, is that they, by default, they are what their father chose unless they opt otherwise. Reflective Family saying, I always understood that Glorfindel and Eristor were buds. Here's to hoping for both of our wishes, although Glorfindel is amazing. So I agree. Absolutely, Glorfindel is amazing. I'd love to see him. I think everybody in Rivendell are buddies. Jewel Elson, thank you so much for the super sticker. I appreciate that. Curtis Newman saying, my girlfriend watched the movies to get better playing the Lego Hobbit. Excellent. It's I quite like the Lego Hobbit, I have to admit. I do enjoy those the Lego Lord of the Rings type games. Alex B saying, it was asked in this chat earlier and seen asked in recent videos also, do you have a private PO box for anyone who wants to send you anything? I don't know, but you can get in contact with me, email me or something, in deepgeek@gmail.com. Oh, which is probably a good time to say all of the things I probably should have said earlier. Patrons, thank you. This is why I build my live streams around the questions from my patrons, because of your support. It means a huge amount to me. I can't do what I do without your support. So thank you, patrons. I hugely appreciate it. I've got a second channel. A couple of people mentioned it already, The Well Told Tale. If you're interested in classic science fiction and fantasy stories, please do check that out. I've got quite a few videos coming out over the next few days, so a few weeks, so keep an eye out for that. I think that's all the announcements I was going to make. Let's have a quick look in the chat, see if there's any more before I end. Joe Bassett, thank you very much, and thank you to your brother as well. Andrew K asking about the next live streams. No, I haven't got them lined up next, but what I'm planning on doing with the live streams, just so you're aware, we've got 2-3 months now till things start getting really busy on this channel. I've made a decision. Westworld I'm not going to be covering in as much detail. I might do 1 or 2 videos, but I'm not going to be covering in as much detail as I have previous seasons. I'm referring everyone over to my friend Hax Dogma, who I collaborated with on both of the last 2 seasons, who is excellent, fantastic channel. Do go and check out Hax. I haven't told him I'm referring people onto him, but do go and check that out and say hi from me. When we get to the TV shows for both House of the Dragon and the Rings of Power, then I will be doing live streams linked with what's going on each week. Until then, I'm going to be increasingly focusing in on those subject matters. So I will be looking at characters from Fire and Blood. That's what I'm going to be going through mostly over the course of the next couple of months till House of the Dragon. Characters, maybe houses. If there are any issues, any things that you want clarified before that TV show, let me know down in the comments below after this video. What I want to do is prepare people for the TV show, so when it comes up, we've not got any burning questions. We can just go straight into it. And also, when it comes to Lord of the Rings videos, I've been going through characters. I did Galadriel, I've done Gandalf, doing Elrond now. If there's anything else, do let me know. If you got this far into the video, then you're clearly at least tolerate what I do. Thank you very much. I would love to know what you think. You're exactly the kind of people I just want to do what you will find useful. So what in the build up to the Rings of Power, what would you find useful? Is it about places? Do you want to know more about Numenor? Do you want to know about Lindon? Do you want to know about Dwarven civilization? Is it specific characters? Let me know down in the comments below. That would be fantastic. But to return, Andrew, to what you were saying, yes, I will set up in the next few days that I will do a month ahead again, so that everybody knows what's happening for the next few. I will be doing probably 2 to 3 House of the Dragon ones for every Rings of Power ones, simply because House of the Dragon is coming sooner. Okay, and I think with that, I will start bringing this one to a close. Some fantastic questions. Thank you very much. Wonderful chat as always. Moderators, you have my undying admiration and thanks. If you are watching this back a little bit later, appearing somewhere around here will be a link to previous live streams I've done, and appearing somewhere around here will be a link to my Patreon, which is the best way to support this channel if you so wish. Okay, everyone, take care, thanks, and I will see you again next time.